I moved into my current house about 2 years ago. It's a small 2-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of street where people put lawn ornaments out and wave at each other when they're getting the mail. I work remotely doing data entry for an insurance company, which means my schedule is completely my own, and I keep weird hours. I'm usually up until 2 or 3 in the morning, and I sleep until 10 or 11. My neighbors know me as the quiet one. I don't cause problems. I don't have parties. I'm just there. I should also explain the layout because it matters. The house has a front door that opens directly into the living room. Off the living room to the left is the hallway, which leads to the bathroom on the right, and then 2 bedrooms at the end. Mine at the very end of the hall, and the second bedroom to the left, which I use as a home office. The kitchen is off the back of the living room, and it has a door that goes out to the backyard. There's also a side door in the laundry room off the kitchen that nobody really uses. I never go through it. I mostly forgot it existed. The neighborhood has this rhythm I got used to pretty quickly. By 10 o'clock at night, everything goes quiet. People are inside. Dogs stop barking. The only regular sounds are the occasional car on the main road 2 blocks over, and the couple across the street who smoke on their porch until about 9. I know the sounds of my house well. It's a newer build, so it doesn't creak the way old houses do. The refrigerator hums. The HVAC kicks on every 40 minutes or so. That's about it. This happened on a Tuesday night in November. I know it was a Tuesday because I remember having just finished a deadline earlier that evening, and I was in a good mood because of it. I made pasta, watched a few episodes of something I'd been putting off, and I was genuinely relaxed. By midnight, I was in my office at my desk doing nothing, just browsing, watching random YouTube videos. The kind of night where you're technically awake, but your brain is already half asleep. At some point around 12:30, I got up to use the bathroom. My office is right next to the bathroom, so it was a 20-second thing. I didn't turn on any lights in the hallway because the bathroom light was enough, and I didn't need them. On my way back to the office, I glanced down the hall toward the living room out of habit. It was dark except for the blue-gray flicker of the TV I'd left on low volume in the living room. I stood there for just a second looking toward the front of the house. That's when I noticed the car. Not inside, obviously, but through the front window. The living room has a big window that faces the street. I could see a car parked directly in front of my house, not in my driveway, on the street, right in front, which normally wouldn't mean anything. People park on the street all the time. But this was after midnight on a Tuesday, in a neighborhood where everyone is in bed by 10. And what caught my attention was that the car was idling. I could see the faint exhaust in the cold air drifting up from behind it. And the parking lights were on, not the headlights, just those dim orange running lights on the side. I stood in my hallway and looked at it through the window from about 30 feet away. My first thought was completely normal. Maybe someone's waiting to pick up a late-night worker. Maybe someone's on the phone. I didn't stare at it or think about it much. I went back to my office. But I didn't go back to YouTube. I just sat there, and I realized that I'd been hearing something for the past few minutes without consciously registering it. A faint sound, subtle enough that I'd written it off as background, the way you do when you're tired and zoned out. But now that I was paying attention, I couldn't unhear it. It was breathing, not my breathing, not the HVAC, something rhythmic and close that was just barely louder than nothing. I want to be clear that I'm not someone who gets scared easily. I'm a 31-year-old man. I've lived alone for 6 years. I don't jump at shadows, but there was something about the combination of the idling car outside and that sound, which may have been nothing, which I was still desperately trying to convince myself was nothing, that made every hair on my arms stand up at the same time. I muted my computer. Complete silence. I didn't hear it anymore. I sat there for probably 2 full minutes, not moving. The HVAC kicked on, ran its cycle, kicked off. Still nothing. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled and told myself I was losing my mind from being alone too much. And then I heard it again. Just once. A single exhale that was too close to be outside, too close to be the TV, and too human to be the refrigerator. It came from the direction of the second bedroom. My office, the room I was sitting in. I don't fully understand what happened in my brain in that moment, but it was like a switch flipping. Everything got louder. My own heartbeat. The TV in the other room. The faint hiss of the HVAC. I slowly pushed back my chair and stood up without making any sound, and I just looked around the room. It's a small room, desk, a bookshelf, a folding table with some printer equipment on it. One closet. The closet door was slightly open, which I normally keep closed, but I had gone into it earlier in the day to get a shipping box, and I could not for the life of me remember if I'd closed it fully when I was done. I stared at that gap in the closet door. It was maybe 2 inches, dark inside. I didn't move toward it. I grabbed my phone off the desk, and I opened the flashlight and pointed it at the closet from across the room. I couldn't see anything, just hanging clothes and some boxes. I made myself walk over and open the door all the way. Nothing. I even moved the clothes. Nothing. I actually laughed out loud in relief. I said Jesus Christ to nobody and went back to the desk and sat down. Still a little shaky, but talking myself back from the edge. I looked up at my monitor, pulled up YouTube again, and that's when I noticed, through the reflection in the dark screen, that the door to my office, which I had pushed most of the way shut when I sat back down, was slowly opening. Not fast, not dramatically, just a slow, steady inward swing. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I know drafts can move doors. I know that. But the windows were all closed and the havoc vent in my office blows upward and the door was moving inward toward me. Not away from me, which is the wrong direction for any draft I could explain. I stared down the hallway for a long time, the living room flicker at the end, the TV going, silence. I got up and walked the entire house. Every room, every closet, under both beds. I checked the front door, locked. I checked the back door in the kitchen, locked. I stood in the laundry room and looked at the side door, and my stomach dropped slightly because the deadbolt was turned vertical, not fully locked, not standing out against its frame, just turned to the position that is 1/2 rotation from open. I stand there looking at that deadbolt for a long time. I do not remember the last time I used that door. I could not tell you with confidence what position that deadbolt was in before that night. I'd like to tell you I can. I cannot. I locked it, turned on every light in the house, and called my brother, who lives about 20 minutes away. He stayed on the phone with me for over an hour while I sat on the couch with the TV on and every single light blazing. By 2:30, I'd calmed down enough that he felt comfortable hanging up. I didn't sleep that night. The car was gone when I looked out the window around 2. The next day, I pulled up the app for my doorbell camera, a Ring camera. I'd installed but honestly never checked, and I went through the overnight footage. The car sat in front of my house from 12:17 to 1:48. That's an hour and 31 minutes. The camera doesn't get a great angle on it, but I could tell it was idling the whole time. And I could tell that at 12:52, which is roughly the window when I heard the sound, and then checked the closet and sat back down, there was a figure that crossed in front of the lower edge of the camera frame on the side of my house, moving in the direction of the laundry room door. The footage is 8 seconds. The figure crosses the bottom corner of the frame and then it's gone. I've watched it probably 200 times. I've never heard that sound again. The car hasn't come back. I don't know whose it was. I don't know what I heard. I've never been able to say with complete certainty that anyone was inside my house that night. But I also have never been able to say they weren't. I had that deadbolt professionally evaluated, and the locksmith told me it was old hardware and could technically jiggle loose under enough pressure from outside. I don't work late in that office anymore. I moved my setup to the bedroom. I keep the door locked when I sleep, and I keep the Ring app open on my phone now. Not because I think it makes me safer, just because I can't stop watching. I want to start by explaining something about myself because it's relevant. I have pretty bad anxiety, the kind that's been with me long enough that I'm used to it and I've learned to manage it. I know what my anxiety feels like. I know the difference between irrational fear, which I have experienced hundreds of times, and actual fear. The reason I'm saying this is because every time I've told this story, someone tries to explain it away as anxiety, and I need you to understand that I know the difference. I know what my brain does when it panics for no reason. This was not that. I was 24 when this happened. I was renting the upstairs unit of a duplex in a city I had just moved to for a job. The place was a 2-bedroom, but the listing called it a 3-bedroom, which felt dishonest but made sense when I saw it in person. 2 actual bedrooms and then a 3rd room that was barely more than a large closet, maybe 9 feet by 10 feet, that someone had put a door on and listed as a bedroom. I used it as storage. Boxes I hadn't unpacked, some furniture from my old place that didn't fit, sports equipment. It was messy, and I kept the door shut. The door didn't lock from the outside, only from the inside, which I thought was a weird design, but never really questioned. Downstairs was a single guy, mid-40s maybe, quiet, polite, when we passed in the driveway. He had a dog. We waved at each other. That was the extent of our relationship. I had no issues with him. The entrance to my unit was through a door at the top of a staircase on the side of the building, an exterior staircase. That brought you up to a small landing and then into the apartment. So my front door was essentially at the top of these stairs on the outside of the building. I tell you this because it's important to understand that if you were entering my apartment, you were coming up those stairs, and I would typically hear that. This started happening about 3 months after I moved in. Small things at first that I noted and dismissed. Coming home from work and having the feeling, not a confirmed observation, just a feeling, that something in the storage room had moved. The boxes seemed slightly different. The basketball I'd tossed in, there was in the corner when I thought I'd left it by the door. Stuff like that. Easy to explain. I dismissed it every time. And then one evening, a Thursday, mid-March, I was on the phone with my mom after dinner, just talking. I was in my bedroom at the back of the apartment, sitting on my bed, and the door to my bedroom was open. At some point mid-conversation, I heard a sound from the direction of the storage room that I can only describe as something shifting, like the settling sound a stack of boxes makes when the bottom one is nudged. It was a single sound and then nothing. I paused in the conversation. My mom asked if I was still there. I said yes and kept going, but I'd heard it. And I kept thinking about it for the rest of the conversation. After I got off the phone, I went and stood in the hallway outside the storage room and listened. Nothing. I opened the door and looked inside. Dark. I hit the light switch. Everything looked the same. I shifted a few boxes around a little. Nothing. I shut the door. Over the next few weeks, it happened a few more times. Different sounds, always from that room. A soft thud. That shifting box sound again. Once what I thought sounded like movement right up against the door from the inside, like something brushing the back of it. Each time I checked and found nothing. Each time I added it to the growing list of things I was telling myself were nothing. The night this stopped being something I could dismiss was a Saturday in late April. I had been out with coworkers and came home around 11:30. I came up the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I immediately noticed something that stopped me on the threshold. The storage room door, which I keep shut, was open about 6 inches. I stood in the doorway of my apartment for probably 15 seconds just looking at that gap. The apartment was dark except for some ambient light coming through the windows. I told myself the door had swung open on its own. It was old and maybe the latch wasn't catching properly. I told myself that, but I did not go and close it right away. Instead, I reached in from the front door and turned on the living room light without stepping fully inside, and I stood there looking down the hall at the dark gap in that storage room door. I don't know what I was waiting for or expecting to see. Nothing moved. I couldn't hear anything. Eventually, I stepped inside, pulled the front door shut behind me, and walked down the hallway. I stopped outside the storage room and pushed the door fully open and hit the light. It looked normal, messy, same as always, but the basketball was on the opposite side of the room from where I had put it after the last time I'd noticed it had moved. I looked at that basketball for a long time. I thought about texting a friend. I thought about calling someone. I thought about how I was going to explain that I was scared of a basketball. I closed the storage room door, and I made sure this time the latch caught fully. And then I noticed something. The lock mechanism on this door, the one that only locked from the inside, was in the locked position. I did not lock it. I had never locked it from the outside because you can't. The only way that lock was in that position was if someone had been inside that room, locked it from the inside, and then, somehow, left it in the locked position. That doesn't make physical sense. I turned the lock back to open and stood there trying to figure out how that was possible. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning I went back and opened the storage room and spent about 30 minutes going through every single thing in there. I moved boxes. I checked behind the furniture. I looked at the window, a small casement window that I had apparently never bothered to check because it was behind a stack of boxes, and found it unlocked. Not open, locked, but not latched, just resting in the frame without the lever engaged. I called my landlord and explained that I wanted a lock on the storage room door that could be engaged from the outside, and I also wanted to know who had access to my unit. He told me the only key holder besides me was him. He got me a padlock for the storage room door within a couple days. I started using it every time I left the apartment. The sounds stopped almost completely after that. About a month later, I'd almost put the whole thing out of my mind. I ran into my downstairs neighbor in the driveway. We did the usual brief exchange, and then he said something that stuck with me. He asked if I'd figured out the draft situation. I didn't know what he was talking about. He said he'd noticed for the past few months that when my storage room window was open, and he gestured up toward it from the driveway, it made a whistle sound he could hear from inside his unit. I looked up at that window. It faces the side of the building. There's a drain pipe that runs along the exterior right next to it, close enough to stand on from the ground if someone had something to brace against. I told him I wasn't sure what he meant about the window, and I went inside. I haven't told him anything else. I don't know who had been in that room or for how long. I don't know if the lock being engaged from the inside means what I think it means. I've thought about it every day since, and I still can't make it make complete sense. I moved out when my lease was up. The storage room is the only thing I think about when I think about that apartment. I still don't understand the lock. Growing up, I shared a room with my younger brother until I was about 15, and then my parents converted the garage into a room for me so I could have my own space. It wasn't fancy, insulation and drywall and a window unit, but it was mine. A door from the garage room opened into the side yard of the house. That door had a lock that I controlled, which felt like having my own entrance to my own place. I was 15, and that felt like everything. The garage was separated from the main house by a short covered breezeway, maybe 12 feet, and then another door into the kitchen. So to get from my room to the rest of the house, you went through the breezeway. At night, when everyone was asleep, the breezeway was dark, and you could hear everything outside through it. Crickets, wind, the neighbor's dog sometimes. I loved it. I used to stay up late out there, just existing in my own space away from my family. By the time I was 17, I had a fairly consistent routine. My parents went to bed around 10:30, 11. My brother was always out by 9. Our neighborhood was a cul-de-sac, quiet. Nothing ever happened. I would stay up in my garage room until 1 or 2 in the morning on weekends, on my laptop, texting, doing whatever teenagers do when no one's watching. The side door to the yard was usually unlocked because I sometimes stepped outside to talk on the phone or just get some air. My parents knew this, and they had told me before that they didn't love it, but I was 17 and stubborn. Nothing ever happened out there. For 2 years, nothing ever happened. And then once something did, it happened in a way I've never fully been able to shake. It was the summer before senior year, a Friday night. I was on my laptop, maybe midnight, with the side door unlocked and cracked open slightly because it was hot and the window unit was struggling. My parents were asleep. The house was completely dark through the breezeway window that I could see from my bed. I started hearing footsteps outside. which wasn't strange at first. My neighborhood had a few people who walked their dogs at night, and there was a woman on the next street over who I'd seen walking at weird hours before. The footsteps were on the cement path that ran along the side of the house right outside my door. They stopped right outside my door, not at the end of the path, not passing by. They stopped at the exact point where my side door was. I sat up in bed and looked at the door. The crack was maybe an inch wide. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see anything through it. I could hear, not voices, not anything identifying, just the absence of the footsteps that had been there a moment ago. It was a still night, and I could hear my own breathing. I told myself it was a dog-walking woman stopping to check her phone or fix a leash or something. I told myself that for about 45 seconds. And then I saw the light from my laptop screen, which I had on my desk, open, the display just bright enough to throw light across the room, shift slightly on the wall near the door, the way light shifts when something briefly interrupts it. Something had moved through the crack in the doorway. Not inside, the door hadn't opened, but something had passed in front of that gap from the outside, close to it. I did not move. I want to be honest about that. I froze completely. I was a 17-year-old kid sitting in my bed at midnight, and I did not get up and check, and I did not do anything brave. I just sat there with my blanket pulled to my chest, staring at the door. I watched the door for probably 3 minutes. Nothing moved. I heard nothing. My window unit hummed. Outside was silent. I got up as quietly as I've ever moved in my life, and I crossed to the door and turned the lock in one motion. I didn't open it. I just locked it, and then I stepped back. I stood there with my hand on the lock and waited. A knock 3 times. Not frantic, not aggressive. 3 calm, evenly spaced knocks. I stopped breathing. Then a voice, low and conversational, not whispering, not shouting, said, "Hey, anyone in there?" I didn't answer. I didn't make a sound. I took my phone off the desk, and I texted my dad from across the breezeway, the most coherent thing I could manage given that my hands were shaking. "Someone is outside my door, knocking. Don't turn on lights. Call the cops." The wait between sending that text and seeing my dad's response was probably 2 minutes, but felt like 30. He responded, "I'm calling. Stay quiet. Lock your door." I typed back, "Already did." I heard nothing more outside. No footsteps leaving. No voice again. Just silence. Which sounds like relief, but was somehow worse. At least footsteps would have told me they were moving away. My dad called the police, and then came through the breezeway to me, and we waited together in my room with the lights off for the cops to arrive. When they did, they walked the property and found no one. But on the cement path right outside my door, there was a single latex glove. Nitrile, the kind you'd get from any box of disposable gloves. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my family's. The cop bagged it like it mattered and told us they'd look into it. We never heard back. Not once. My parents had a motion sensor light and a security camera installed the next week. The side door got a deadbolt. I stopped leaving it unlocked. But here's the thing I've never been able to stop thinking about. That voice, calm, low, completely casual, said, "Anyone in there?" Not hello, not is someone there, not hey, sorry to bother you. Anyone. As if they were checking whether a space was occupied. As if the answer being no would have been the answer they were hoping for. It's been 9 years. I still think about how they stopped exactly at my door. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't locked it in that exact moment. I think about the fact that they knocked anyway, and what that means, whether that was genuinely checking if I was awake, or whether it was something else. I don't know who was outside that door. I don't know what the glove means. I've come up with dozens of explanations over the years, and none of them sit right with me. The one that sits worst is the one that makes the most sense, that they didn't know I was in there, and they were checking